Okay. Good evening, and welcome to the Co-Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist. I think we don't need to wait until the bells are done because the noise of the machinery is much overpowering this anyway. So I'm just going to speak up a little bit, and then also please, when you use the microphone for your reflections and your suggestions, just make sure you hold it really close because it helps everyone to hear across the room even. You would think we don't need a microphone for across the room, but actually it's very helpful if everyone holds it close to their lips. And yeah, we're going to have to live with this. Okay. I'm Ulrike McGregor, and I'm delighted that you all made it here tonight in person, coming through the snow and fighting the ice. And I also warmly welcome everyone who's joining us on the live stream. This is the third of 4 Advent reflections on Scripture through works of art. And tonight's artworks, the 3 we are looking at, are all focused on Our Lady, the Blessed Virgin Mary. Our first painting this evening is the Annunciation. It was painted by the Italian Gothic artist Simone Martini and Lippo Memmi in 1333. And it was part of a triptych created in the side altar in Siena Cathedral. Our second painting, The Immaculate Conception of El Escorial, was created between 1660 and 1665, during the creative zenith of the Baroque era. It is one of Bartolomé Esteban Murillo's many successful iconographic depictions of Mary, free of original sin from the moment of her conception. Our third and final work of art of this evening is the statue of Our Lady of Lourdes, created in 1864 by Joseph Fabisch, a highly regarded French sculptor of religious works. The statue stands within the rock cave of the Massabielle in Lourdes. However, before we begin our reflections, I would like to introduce you to the arts and crafts movement and discuss the influence of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood on this movement. As some of you may remember, last week we reflected on the painting The Return of the Dove to the Ark by the pre-Raphaelite artist John Everett Millais. This work depicts Noah's 2 stepdaughters on the ark, tenderly caring for the returning dove, exemplifying the meticulous detail and symbolic richness characteristic for pre-Raphaelite work. And I mentioned then that the pre-Raphaelites profoundly shaped not only painting, but also had an influence on architecture, interior design, and decorative arts, directly fueling the rise of the arts and crafts movement, emerging in Great Britain in the 1860s. And I thought I would mention that because I just said that they had a big influence, but then I never did the next step telling you what that led to. So it led to the arts and crafts movement. Both the pre-Raphaelites and the arts and crafts movement shared core ideals. And these were a rejection of the industrial mass production and their perceived ugliness, a reverence of handcrafted quality, a particular interest in Gothic art, and therefore they were interested in the revival of medieval and pre-industrial techniques. And they had a belief that beauty should enrich everyday life. And also they were convinced, and they had a great conviction, that fine art, for example, paintings and sculptures, and decorative art, such as furniture, ceramics, textile, and others, are actually deeply interconnected. And until then, and probably still now again, there's always a little bit this fight between decorative art and fine art, but they were very much believed into the interconnection of these two. And so as a consequence of these ideals and ideas, the pre-Raphaelites were uniquely invested in designing decorative objects that would then appear within their paintings, blurring the lines between artwork and artifact. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples. For example, this is William Holman Hunt's famous painting, The Light of the World, created in 1852-53, which we actually reflected on during our Advent Reflection series in 2023. And it depicts Christ holding a lantern, symbolic for the light of conscience. And this is a perfect example. Hunt lavished his attention on every little detail on the painting. But he also designed and sketched the lantern. So he spent a lot of time just going into every little detail of this lantern. And then he commissioned a metal worker, William Haking, to fabricate it. And then he included that into his painting. So it really has a full circle. Another example where there's a similar close connection between the creation of fine art and decorative objects can be seen in the painting Jephthah by Millais, created in 1867. For this painting, Holman Hunt designed an Egyptian chair and then had it designed or manufactured by J.C. Grace. And then Millais included it into his painting. And you can just see the back of the seat over there. So again, there are multiple processes, and there was a real collaboration between craftsmen and artists, fine artists. Another example is the pre-Raphaelite also viewed the picture frame as an integral component of a work of art. Hunt, in particular, created individualized frame designs unique to each painting. This is evident in the portrait of his son, Cyril Benoni Holman Hunt, painted in 1880, in which he demonstrates mastery not only in painting, but also in frame design. So these are hand-drawn designs by Holman Hunt for this particular painting. And in this case, he actually also produced the frame himself, creating a unified work of art from concept to execution. A pivotal figure in the arts and crafts movement was William Morris, and he was an artist, poet, and designer, and a close associate of the pre-Raphaelites. Morris later founded the famous Morris & Co. company, someone might be familiar with that, translating the Brotherhood's passion for Gothic and medieval aesthetics, natural forms, and craftsmanship into functional home goods, such as tapestries, wallpapers, stained glass windows, textiles, and furniture. One of his most iconic designs is obviously the Strawberry Thief. Morris became one of the defining forces of the arts and crafts movement. And now moving on to the US, the arts and crafts movement also came into the US. It flourished roughly from 1876 to 1916, gaining major momentum after the Civil War and peaking around 1900 to 1916. The movement in the US was strongly shaped by the British model, and especially by Morris's work. In the United States, schools and craftsman programs emphasized high-quality design and skill making, foundations of the arts and crafts principles. The movement took root in cities such as Boston, Chicago, and many others. Key American figures included furniture maker Gustav Stickley and Charles Rolfs. These are just examples, and they're at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And I personally love the clock. I think it's very beautiful. Writer and producer Albert Hubbard, architects and designers Charles and Henry Green and Julia Morgan were all champions of handcrafted integrity and simplicity. And as the last example, one of our favorite, Frank Lloyd Wright, extended the arts and crafts movement and the ideas into architecture through his philosophy of the complete environment, where building, interior, furniture, and ornament formed a unified whole. He pioneered what became known as the Prairie School. This style, with his low-pitched roofs, open plans, horizontal emphasis, and use of natural materials, redefined American domestic architecture and interior design. Together, these individuals shaped a distinctly American vision of modern design, rooted in craftsmanship, simplicity, and honest materials. However, by the 1920s, the movement began to fade. Rapid urbanization and the cultural embrace of modern technology made the romantic medievalism of arts and crafts feel increasingly out of step with contemporary life. Machine age modernity and the search for a new national identity replaced handcrafted ideals, marking the end of the arts and crafts movement in America. So following this brief introduction to the arts and crafts movement, I would like to turn now to our first painting of the evening, the Annunciation, created by Simone Martini and Lippo Memmi. And Lippo Memmi was later on, first they worked together, and later he was Simone's brother-in-law. And the painting was created in 1333, and it's now at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. And since we kind of talked about it, we spoke last week about supports. So this is a panel, so it's not canvas, it's wood, and it's as gold ground. So they used gold leaf for most of the background. And tonight I will focus on the life and career of Simone Martini. And you can follow along on the handout as I introduce the artist. Simone Martini was born in Siena, probably in 1284. Very little is known about Simone's artistic education, but it is believed that he was a pupil of Duccio, one of the greatest Italian painters of the Middle Ages. Simone worked predominantly in the Gothic painting style and had significant influence on the spread of Sienese painting through Europe. At the beginning of the 1300s, Siena was at the forefront of artistic innovation and achievement. While not a port or river city, Siena was located on a main thoroughfare known as the Via Francigena. This route, which ran from Rome to European cities north of the Alps, brought a stream of portable objects from France and other artistic centers through the city gates, stimulating economic activity and artistic imagination. The beginning of the 14th century was a period of peace and prosperity in Siena, often described as a golden age. Artists, especially painters, transformed Siena, expanding their art to its limits to create both large decorative schemes for civic and religious buildings and refined small-scale paintings that were collected and admired far beyond the city walls. The earliest surviving work by Simone was his commission to paint the Maestra fresco in the Sienese seat of government, the Palazzo Pubblico, signed and dated 1315. In the following years, Simone also received commissions for many paintings and frescoes outside of Siena, such as Naples, Pisa, Assisi, and other cities. The Annunciation, which was signed and dated, was painted for the altar of St. Ansanus, patron saint of Siena, in the transept of Siena Cathedral. In the later 1330s, at the height of his career, Simoni abandoned his successful practice in Siena and moved to Avignon in France. Avignon had become the new papal court in 1309, following escalating conflicts between the Italian papacy and the French crown. This dispute had resulted in the election of a French pope and ultimately the move of the papal courts from Rome to Avignon. And this period lasted from 1309 until 1377. In June 1344, Simoni made his will shortly before his death in Avignon. His wife and daughter returned to Siena, where they died of the plague, along with countless others in the city. And it is estimated that in Siena, 30 to 50% of the population, and at that point probably 80,000 people, died after the plague had arrived in Italy in 1347. As we consider our first work of art of the evening, I will quote from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 1, verse 28. And coming to her, he said, "Hail, full of grace, the Lord is with you." But she was greatly troubled at what was said and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. And at this point, I would like to invite your comments, your thoughts, and I have some. We can already jump maybe into this, or whatever we can stay on the overview as well.
Question to start: who are the figures on the outside?
Good question. So let's set this all up. Exactly. So this is the centerpiece of the triptych. And in the middle, we have the Annunciation with Mary and the angel Gabriel. This over here is Saint Ansanus, which was a martyr, and he was the patron saint, or one of the patron saints of Siena. And he holds the colors of Siena as a flag, and he also holds a branch. The sign of a martyrdom, the palm branch. There you go. And it's not 100% clear who she is. It is either believed that it is Ansanus' mother, Saint Maxima, or Saint Margaret. And that's according to the official website of the Uffizi gallery. So even they weren't quite sure who she is. So we have beautiful, and then we have tundras. They're called these round medallions. And then, I had them highlighted here. And she was also a martyr, so she's holding the palm branch. And these were prophets. And they're holding little signs, and again, the website didn't show the exact translation. I don't know if someone went through it, but it's a reference to the incarnation. So we have Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and Prophet Daniel. So maybe we can, and so this is the main part of the painting.
So most depictions of Mary and Annunciation, they show a poor young girl, and this actually has more like opulence and it looks openness to the I guess the painting, it looks, it doesn't look like a poor girl, right? I mean, even the place where she's at, and just the angel, everything, the way it's depicted, is a little bit more, I would say, opulent than what you normally see Mary.
Yeah, and I would leave that as it's the artistic freedom, but you're entirely correct. This is definitely, she's in a beautiful setting. I think one beautiful detail is Simone tried to imitate like a granite floor in the room that she's in, a beautifully decorated, not chair, but more like a throne that she sits on. Oh yeah, it's beautiful, it's elaborate, and it's because it was going to be in a chapel. I think the idea of many artists is you want to present something nicer, because at that time people lived in poverty, and you don't want to then go into a church and see more of it. So I think that's quite often the thinking. You want to beautify something, and because that speaks to people's mind and soul. Sorry. Yeah, we really have to use the microphone, because otherwise no one, it's hard to hear.
I guess would it also have something to do with the growth and what Siena was going through at the time, right?
Oh, for sure. Oh yeah, they were wealthy, and they wanted to show that. Oh, for sure. Yes. Yeah.
I'm kind of struck by the angel. It looks like giving her an olive branch. I don't know if that's
yes,
true. Like,
exactly.
and
that's exactly
Mary's like, okay, I'm going to try to give you some peace, because Mary looks like, oh, I'm just really not sure I want to hear this, and I'm also curious about what she was reading.
Yeah.
Well, my first thought in this period in history is that Catherine of Siena, who is probably the most noted person from Siena in most of our minds, would have seen this and been influenced by it and been moved to try to unify the church. You know, she wrote to the popes in Avignon and tried to resolve that with Rome and try to get this unification of the Western Church. And to me, this is a very fundamental sort of an idea about the person of Christ and his mother and his personhood, and who the church should be dedicated to, rather than political entities that are fighting within Christendom. So to me, my first thought is that Catherine of Siena would have seen this and been influenced by it to act, you know, and whatever her result was very unifying in the church. And that's my first thought. When I hear of Siena, I think of Catherine. Mm-hmm. That's just my bias, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like Diane, I was kind of struck by almost the wariness, because I've seen that look from women before.
Oh yes, and that's why I chose the quote. I mean, there's many things I could have chosen out of the chapter and which verse to use, but I think the verse, and she was kind of struck by, first of all, the greeting, the way she was greeted by the Archangel Gabriel. And I always love that every angel, and I've said that before, but because it's really striking, every angel has to say, don't be afraid. Because I think in an encounter with the Archangel Gabriel is overwhelming. so I think her reaction, I mean, I could understand probably why we see the face and why she reacts that way. Yeah. It's really, I don't know if you can see it, this is really neat. Simone also used the words Ave Gratia plena Domino tecum, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. And he used gesso to heighten the letters, and then used gold leaf to kind of put them over it. And it's the words are literally coming out of the Archangel Gabriel's mouth and kind of going straight into the Virgin Mary's ear. So I thought that was a beautiful detail.
Well, and now that I see this, there was a feature of the center under the arch, where it would seem as I'm presuming it's the Father surrounded by angels, and it seems like there's a beam coming from there.
Yes.
As well, like into her heart to send
Yes.
the Spirit.
Yeah.
So this sort of convergence, it's a lovely geometric pattern, huh? The convergence of the words of the angel and the radiance from the Father. Marvelous.
Yes. Yeah. So yes, there's the Holy Spirit, and they depicted as a dove surrounded by angels. And then, yes, so the spoken word also comes straight at her, and it kind of hits her on her shoulder there, but kind of close to her eye, to her ear. Yes. And yeah, it's and then the olive branch. Yeah, so bringing peace. I mean, he comes and bringing peace, connecting the heavens and the earth, and Simone also not introduced, but used the symbol of the lily as a sign for Mary's purity. And maybe one more thing, I would like to, something that I always like, in many annunciations, you see Mary holding or reading a book. And I think there's not the one explanation. I think there is multiple explanations for that. I think one is any artist who chooses to include the book wants to show her wisdom, her piety, and also because she will be the vessel of Jesus, the Word made flesh. I think again there's a lot of play on that. And then if we think of the Gospel of James, which is not a canonical text, but which gives us a lot of beautiful background of the life of Jesus and of Mary. And there we hear that Saint Anne, her mother, taught her to read. There's actually some works of art that also show that Saint Anne works with the Virgin Mary and kind of teaches her. And then it is also mentioned that she goes off and she's being taught the Old Testament. So I think there's multiple reasons why an artist might choose to include the book. Not necessarily because if we think back at the time in the 14th century, most people weren't able to read. So it wasn't something that was necessarily common. And even certainly more so 2,000 years ago, a selected number of people could read, and probably books like this wouldn't even exist. But the idea, so it's more a translation. It's the wisdom is knowing about the Old Testament, being taught about it.
She was special because she could read.
Yes, she was
and
special.
she would have the repose and the time, and was alone, not doing all the work that most women would have to do at that time. So.
Yes, and it was a kind of trying to provoke people that would see the painting, or even today us, to go back to the scripture and spend the time of reading the scripture and become familiar with it and be able to interpret it. Any other thoughts, suggestions? There's always lots to do. Let's see, I think. This one's playing. And I will leave this picture with the following question. Do I ask God a clarifying question when He calls and when His calls seem impossible? Or do I rely on assumptions? And I think she did. I mean, she said, "Are you sure I'm the right person here?" And I thought that was beautiful too. It's kind of this not just blindly following, but being open, and then once it has been clarified, yes, you are the right person to do the job, it is her fiat. She goes with the yes. So yes, please, we should move on to our second work of art of the evening, and it's the Immaculate Conception of El Escorial, painted between 1660 and 1665 by the Spanish Baroque artist Bartolomé Esteban Murillo. And you can follow on the handout as I introduce the artist. Murillo, born in Seville, Spain, in 1617, was known as the greatest religious painter of his age. He would live and work in Seville his entire life and was a major artist of the Catholic Counter-Reformation. During his childhood, Seville remained the foremost city in Spain, equal in power and population to Venice, Amsterdam, or even Madrid. Seville had long held the monopoly on trade with the New World, and despite Spain's near constant wars with France and the Low Countries, the city remained prosperous well into the 1630s. By the early 1650s, however, Seville, although still seen as Spain's cosmopolitan and intellectual center, was no longer a commercial powerhouse. The city had lost its trade monopoly to the port city of Cadiz. That was the city Christopher Columbus sailed from on his second and fourth voyage. Almost half of Seville's population was wiped out in the plague of 1647 to 1652, a catastrophe followed by famine, recession, and further trade disruption. Partly in reaction to this economic disintegration, Seville's religious orders, the Franciscans, Dominicans, and Capuchins, dedicated their considerable resources towards charity and commissioning artworks, to both give hope to the populace and artistically reinforce the Counter-Reformation. Murillo was deeply devout, shaped his life and career on service to the Catholic Church and its fraternity, many of which are still active today. Unlike the somewhat earlier generation of master Spanish painters, including Diego Velázquez, Francesco de Zuberan, and Alonso Cano, Murillo did not aspire to royal patronage. His connection to Seville's aristocracy and religious brotherhoods were enough to facilitate a flow of commissions. Murillo also painted sensitive portraits of the local street life in Seville that offered an alternative strand to his impressive religious oeuvre. He died aged 65 in 1682, resulting from a fall from scaffolding while painting a fresco in the Capuchin church in Cadiz. And many might also be familiar with of his paintings where he paints these beautiful, but the children in the street with their shoes off and eating alongside the street or holding a sheep. So they're charming, they're beautiful. He went out and did not only painted religious painting, but really went out to painted the people in the city. As you consider our second work of art of the evening, I will quote from the book of Revelation, chapter 12, verses 1 and verse 10. A great sign appeared in the sky, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Now have salvation and power come, and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his anointed. And so this is our second work of art. Is there anything that your eyes fall first, or a question, or I always like to open this up. If no one comes forward, then I can jump in, but I don't want to jump in right from the beginning.
This is one of my favorites, and it's also, actually I have it at home. Mary's looking upward, and then I love her colors of the blue. That's also a symbol of her. And then I have a book that talks about Mary's flowers, and I see that some of the little angels have some of the flowers associated with Mary.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really endearing.
Yeah.
So is that the moon underneath her feet?
Exactly. So a crescent of the moon is underneath her feet. It symbolizes her victory over darkness, over evil, and paganism. And that's, again, tied right back into the reading from the Revelation.
I guess to me, like what really, it brings me a lot of peace as I see her, because there's a lot of acceptance and love, and like in her semblance. You know, she's it's just the white, the purity, all of that. It just gives you peace, and it fills you with good. Just
Yes, yeah.
She looks really young.
Yes, in that one, again, there is that artistic freedom, and I think with this type of painting, when the artists paint the Immaculate Conception, they are usually quite young, because it's kind of the beginning of her life. So the Immaculate Conception was, just to give some background, it was the fourth dogma, the fourth Marian dogma, that was discussed for a long time, but it wasn't really officially made a dogma until 1854. But already in the 17th century, in particular in Spain, there was a great devotion to Mary, and there was a great belief in her conception without original sin. So that is really, so it's the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary is really about the conception of her without original sin. So she was the perfect vessel to then carry Jesus Christ into the world. And it's quite interesting, just to Michael actually, what I read was that even between the Franciscans and the Dominicans, there was a little bit, because some part of the Catholic Church was supporting the dogma and were pushing to initiate the dogma, and there were others, I think the Franciscans and the Jesuits, they were very much in favor. The Dominicans were kind of against it, but the Franciscans and Jesuits were very much pushing the idea. And even now today, I think the Protestants do not support the dogma of the Immaculate Conception.
Each each of the angels below are carrying a plant.
Yes.
And I'm assuming that each of those are symbolic for something.
Exactly. So over here, the one furthest to your left holds a lily. Again, it's kind of the sign for the Virgin Mary, for her purity. The angel kind of right underneath the crescent moon holds a rose that's also very symbolic for the Virgin Mary, kind of love, tenderness. The putti furthest in the back is holding an olive branch for peace and also victory. And this is a palm branch for martyrdom. But yes, so every single one of the puttis is holding a flower or a plant. Yeah, and it's just, I think, coming back to what you said, it's just makes you feel good, right? It's just, if you look at it, she's absolutely gorgeous. The surrounding, again, coming back to the Revelation part in Revelation, the sun is behind her, God is supporting her. When we quite often talk about the light that kind of comes and shines through Jesus Christ.
I think God definitely made a good choice.
Oh, thank you.
With Mary, because the cherubs seem to really like her.
Yeah, and this is a very classic depiction of the Immaculate Conception. So even Murillo himself created probably around 20 of these paintings. And he always tried to make slight differences, so they're not copies, but they are obviously kind of similar. And we were talking about this, so it's the white garment, it's the blue cloak that Mary wears around her shoulders. It's either clasped hands or open hands. It's kind of a younger face, and quite often she looks up to the sky. We have a bright light that shines behind her. We have the crescent moon. Sometimes, and I think Murillo has, some of his paintings have this 12 stars as a crown around her head. Sometimes he includes them and sometimes he hasn't. Yeah, so this is, it's one of these make you feel wonderful paintings. And it's a very abstract concept, the Immaculate Conception. And so I think that's, artists certainly in the 17th century kind of came up with those symbols to include that into a painting to make it recognizable for the viewers. Yes. And now it's time to move on to our last painting, or the last work of art. And I will leave this painting with the following question. Where was God present for me today, even in difficult feelings or relationships? And how can I seek him there? Our third and last work of art of this evening is Our Lady of Lourdes, created by Joseph Fabisch in 1864, based on the description of apparitions to Bernadette Soubirous. And one more time, if it's helpful, you can follow along in the handout. Joseph Fabisch was born in 1812 and he died in 1886. He was a highly respected religious sculptor in France. In 1845, he began work as a professor at the École des Beaux-Arts de Lyon, becoming the school's director in 1874. Fabisch was named the official sculptor to the Diocese of Lyon. He created the golden statue of the Virgin placed on top of the chapel of the Basilica of Notre Dame de Fourvière in Lyon. as well as many other notable liturgical and monumental works. In 1863, he was commissioned by the La Cour sisters under the supervision of Abbot Blanc to create a faithful statue to Bernadette Soubirous of Lourdes' description of her 1858 visions of the Virgin Mary. Fabisch visited Bernadette in Lourdes in September 1863 to record her recollections of Our Lady and to sculpt a figure in her likeness. The sculpture was dedicated on April the 4th, 1864, in front of 20,000 people in the grotto of Marzibielle on the edge of Lourdes. Although the statue is widely praised, with many copies in existence worldwide, Bernadette felt it did not precisely capture her vision of the Virgin Mary. Fabisch later described his inability to translate the exact description of Bernadette as his greatest sorrow of his artistic life. In 1868, Fabisch created another Madonna, this one with the child, for the crypt of the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception in Lourdes. Bernadette, born into a very poor family in Lourdes, southwest France, on January 7th, 1844, and as a 14-year-old girl, had 18 apparitions of a young lady. These apparitions occurred between February 11th and July 16th of 1858, as she was gathering firewood near the grotto of Marzibielle. The young lady who appeared to Bernadette identified herself as the Immaculate Conception. Bernadette later took vows as Sister Marie Bernard, as a sister of charity in Nevers. She died of tuberculosis in 1879, aged 35. After a canonical investigation, Bernadette's report were eventually declared worthy of belief on February the 18th, 1862. And the Marian apparition became known as Our Lady of Lourdes. Bernadette was beatified in 1921 and canonized in 1933 by Pope Pius XI. The grotto where the apparitions occurred has become a major pilgrimage site and Marian shrine, known as the Sanctuary of Our Lady of Lourdes. Lourdes attracts around 5 million pilgrims of all religions each year and is one of the most visited Catholic shrines, besides Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico and Our Lady of Fatima in Portugal. The Catholic Church has officially recognized 72 miracles of inexplicable healings in association with Our Lady of Lourdes, with the most recent one actually accepted in just this year, 2025. As you observe the statue of Our Lady of Lourdes, either here on the screen or on your handout, I would like to quote from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 1, verse 38. Mary said, "Behold, I'm the handmaid of the Lord. May it be done to me according to your word." And with this one, I would like to extend the exploration a little bit more, because it's not so much about the artwork, but it's more about the apparitions itself, and maybe the rise of this Lourdes as a pilgrimage site, and maybe your experiences or what do you think? There are some physicians in here. Do you believe in miracles? Good. Has anyone been to Lourdes? Just to maybe give a little bit of background, so I already mentioned it was Bernadette. She was a 14-year-old girl, and she lived just in town of Lourdes. She was very, she was one of multiple children. They were extremely poor, and she had asthma. She was quite sick as a young child, and so they were sent out to collect firewood. And so she went outside of town to Masibiel, which was an open field, and people would use it for herding their sheep, but also kids would go there to collect firewood. And so she was falling behind of her siblings. They were running ahead, and so suddenly she felt a rush of wind, but even though nothing was really moving, and then she had this apparition of a young woman with a great light and beautifully dressed and holding a rosary. And later the other kids didn't see it. She told them about her vision, but she asked them not to talk about it. But of course, they told the parents, and they got upset about it. And you can imagine it, a young girl telling a story like this. And it was very difficult. However, she was then forbidden to go back, but she did go back, and Our Lady appeared to her again and again. And there was even a period where for 14 days every day, the Lady appeared to her. And eventually, Bernadette kept asking her, "Who are you?" Bernadette had some basic education, but not much. She had some religious education, but still she kept asking, and eventually Our Lady told her she was the Immaculate Conception. And obviously it had stirred up the town. There were a lot of that were very upset about her. Some people thought she was insane. Certainly the priest, there was difficulties. They wouldn't believe her. But when the story goes, after Our Lady had told her she was Immaculate Conception, she went to the priest and told him. And since the dogma, the apparitions were in 1858, and the dogma was just officially initiated in 1854. And for a 14-year-old girl in that setting, for her to know about Immaculate Conception, that seemed to have convinced the priest that was what she was saying might be true.
To me, Fabricia's statue is the most familiar, certainly in my lifetime, of Marian statues around the world. The story is a complicated one, and I've been to Lourdes many times, and if you're interested in seeing the story in a Hollywood style, there's several Hollywood movies about her, of which a very good one was The Song of Bernadette, which won multiple Academy Awards, I don't know, maybe 50, 70 years ago. And that's probably one I would start with. But the interesting thing about it was, often society doesn't realize that when a member of the church, or not a member of the church, is responsible for a miracle or an apparition, how difficult they're received by the church. It's rare that it's welcomed. It's a challenge to church authorities. It's a challenge to conformity. And Bernadette went through a lot of suffering and had a very difficult life. And it wasn't until really later on that it became appreciated with the recurrence of these miracles. But it's a tough job being a saint.
Bernadette is kind of a very good example of the sort of person that our God chooses to reveal these sorts of things to, because she was ignorant, she was malnourished, she she was 14 years old, but she was only 4'10" because she was so malnourished because of her poverty. She had many immune problems. She had, it's often talks about that she had respiratory problems, but she also had GI problems.
Okay.
She couldn't eat normal food,
Oh, okay.
and she would have GI issues if she ate the normal food that the poor people ate there was maize or corn, and she couldn't digest that. So she just had many, many problems, health problems, and she was malnourished. And later on in life, when she got a better nutrition, her intellectual capacity improved. But when she was a young person at the age of 14, when all this was happening, she was viewed as sort of mentally impaired. She was not really literate at that time. She didn't speak French. She was from this weird little pocket in the Pyrenees where they spoke sort of a patois that was half French, half Spanish. And when Our Lady spoke to her, she didn't speak to her in French. She spoke to her in that patois. And if you read a quote of what Our Lady said to her, it was not in French. It was in this weird patois. And Our Lady spoke to her in a language that she could understand and relate to, but that everybody else in the world held in disdain. And it just goes to show how God reaches out to people who are simple and reach out in faith despite what the world may view them as. And that's a good part of why this was so hard to accept by the rest of the world, because it happened at a period shortly after the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception was promulgated by the papacy. And it was viewed very negatively by some political groups, especially in France, and was promulgated by others. But Bernadette just was a great prophet because she said what she learned. She only quoted Our Lady, and she didn't try to ever get beyond what she understood. And what she understood was very simple.
Right.
She was a very clever person, actually, as it came to pass. And she had a very short life because she had a life of, she was I mean, she did what she was, her quote, what she said is, I was a tool. I was like a broom you use to sweep a room. And after the room is swept, you put the broom behind the door, and it's out of sight. And that's what she said her role was, is she was selected as a tool to say something to the world, and that was it. And after her role was done, she went into a convent and closed herself off, and everybody respected her there. When new novices would come into her convent, would say, "Oh, I want to meet the visionary of Lourdes," you know, and they would be introduced to her, and they would say, "This is her," and Bernadette would say, "Yes, this is just me," you know. She wasn't an impressive person, and she recognized that she wasn't an impressive person, but she was selected to do something very significant in the order of faith.
Yeah.
And that's all I've never been there. I've never been to Lourdes, or I've never, I don't know that much about it. But, I've read the Song of Bernadette, and I've seen the movie. I endorse the movie. If you haven't seen the movie, Jennifer Jones played Bernadette beautifully, and
Yeah.
You know, a lot of it is really brought out in that movie, which is really remarkable from a movie from the World War II era, you know, 1940s. But it was a wonderful movie, and if you do nothing else, see the movie. But read the book, too.
Yeah.
The book was actually written by an expatriate Jewish exile from Europe that was fleeing Nazi persecution. He ended up in Lourdes by accident and was so moved by what was going on in the city that he wrote this book about this Catholic Christian visionary. It's also remarkable.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing.
Thank you. Oh, it really seems to touch her. That's wonderful. I call it gold dust. If I touch your heart with a painting or a conversation, that's exactly, I fulfilled my work for the week. Thank you very much. And then there's, again, just kind of don't forget the water, because a spring came out of the grotto, and that's really what is believed to be healing. But again, she also said, don't just take the water. You have to pray and you have to have faith. Just the water is not going to make a difference. And even though 72 miracles have been associated with Our Lady of Lourdes, many have not been reported. I mean, there is a belief that many more have happened. I mean, thousands probably, because to have a miracle officially accepted takes decades. I mean, I think there were two, one was this year and one was 2 years ago. It took almost 100 years to go through all the paperwork to make sure it really was officially a miracle, with ticking the boxes what is supposed to be a miracle. So, but many more happened, because many people go home and they feel better, and it's a miracle that they carry in their own heart. So we're way over time. So I will conclude this evening with the following question. Am I open to changes God calls me to? And how do I live out my own yes to God's plan? And thank you very much, and hopefully see you next week.